Welcome, everyone. For those of you out that just joined us, I just wanted to reiterate that we will start promptly at 5:30. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Center's Researching Race Professional Development Series. My name is Daphne Biz. I am one of the graduate fellows at the center, and I will be you all's facilitator for tonight's presentation. We will introduce our speaker in a moment, but I'm going to go through some of the events that the center hosts for those of you all that may be unfamiliar. Give me one second, sorry. So the Center for K through 12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education is a center that really focuses on teachers in the pre-K through 12th grade educational settings. We focus on research, professional development, networking, advocacy, as well as consulting. For those of you all who also may be unaware, the center is housed at University at Buffalo. Here on the screen here, you see some of the center staff, myself and my lovely daughter at the top corner. Then we have some of our staff on the call. We have future Dr. James in the center. Dr. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thank y'all so much for being here for our Researching Race series. I am Donovan, fourth year doctoral student here at the University of Buffalo and a fellow here at the center.
Thank you so much. In addition to myself and future Dr. James, we have Hannah. We also have Abigail Henry, and then our assistant director, which is Dr. Christina King. I'm so sorry that I failed to mention that our lovely director is Dr. LaGarrett King, whom you saw on the slide before this one. As you are entering in, I also invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're from and what brings you to this Research and Race series. So now we're going to jump into some of the events and programs that we host more specifically. We kicked off our Black History Nerd Saturday School in September. We have one final Black History Nerd Saturday School session that is scheduled for December 13th. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through this small presentation where you will have access to register if that is something that interests you. And here we have more information about our next nerd session. In a moment, you will see the registration link in the chat so that you all can come learn with Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook explores the experiences of Black educators with school reforms in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So if that is something that interests you, I invite you all to register and attend. All of our events, majority of our events are virtual and they are recorded. So if you happen to not be able to make that certain time and date, you can always check our website, which will also be included in the chat to look at any replays of events that we've had. We also have book clubs. We will have more coming in the spring. Dr. James, future Dr. James hosted a book club the first part of the fall, and then Dr. King is currently hosting a book club that's going on now, and you will find information about that as well. One of our big initiatives is our Teaching Black History Micro Credential, which is a 1 year micro credential program where you meet virtually and you are engaged in different activities and different projects that really foster and help cultivate a teaching Black history pedagogy. So the person of contact for that would be Abigail Henry. She couldn't make this call tonight, but more information about that will also be dropped in the chat for you all. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ashley here, who is going to be our lovely presenter. Dr. Ashley is an assistant professor in the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and African American and African Studies at the Ohio State University. Dr. Smith scholarship critically analyzes how social structures, educational policies, and institutions shape and reproduce harmful inequalities for Black women and girls. At the intersection of state violence and school discipline, her work examines the various forms of punishment, anti-Blackness, and gender-based violence Black girls experience in schools and society. She is currently working on her first book project, which is tentatively titled Unschooling Black Girls Navigating Suburbia, Anti-Black Girl Violence and Mechanisms of School Survival. Dr. Smith research also explores alternative educational spaces, also known as Black girl spaces, created by and for Black girls. As a community engaged scholar, Dr. Smith has co-created various Black girl spaces alongside Black girls and women. Informed by her community engaged work, her scholarship explores the necessity of Black girl spaces within and outside of schools that center Black girls' exploration of their identities, moments of joy, and acts of refusal to harm and violence they often navigate. Her work has also been published in peer-reviewed journals such as Feminist Studies and the Journal of Negro Education. And she's also published her work, Theorizing Black Girlhood, in the Black Girlhood Studies collection. Dr. Smith is also the recipient of the 2022 National Academy of Education Spencer Foundation Postdoctoral Fellowship. She has received additional grants and awards for her scholarship and community engaged work from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, Providence College's Arts and Sciences Summer Scholar Grant, and the American Educational Research Association Division G, and Critical Educators for Social Justice Special Interest Group. With no longer ado, I invite you all to point your attention to Dr. Ashley as she gives us her presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Good. Okay, perfect. I'll try to watch the chat, but if anything happens with sound, please feel free to just cut in. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen because I do have a bit to share with you all today. So I will just get into it, and then I look forward to a really lively conversation and discussion. So I will share here. Um, and then into the slideshow. Okay, can you all see everything okay? Those slides? Good. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so the talk today is on theorizing Black girlhood. And again, I am Dr. Ashley Smith-Purviance. I did prefer to be called Ashley during this presentation, so please feel free to just refer to me as my first name. So I want to set the context and create some safe space, especially I want to make sure that we care for ourselves during this moment where we are constantly being inundated with narratives of harm and violence. Some of the content in this presentation is of a sensitive nature regarding violence, assault, mental health, and unaliving and suicide. And so I just want to make sure to keep us all safe. Please feel free to take care of yourselves during this talk as well. Before I move forward, I also just want to hold space for a very dear friend, a sister, poet, community organizer, a fighter of Black freedom and liberation, and a fellow academic scholar, deeply passionate about Black youth, about community schools, and the Black Panther Party, Dr. Gwen Baxley. I want to hold space for her as she deeply impacted my life in so many ways. And without her friendship and watching her own path and on her own journey, and the way she blended her passion for our people with her scholarship, her art, and spoken word, I honestly cannot say I would be the kind of scholar that I am today. And so, in a moment of silence, I want to hold space and just thank Gwen for the presence that she has had in my life. She recently passed away, and so I just want to share lots of love to her and her family during this time. I will never forget the moments that Gwen and I shared, both big and small, and she will forever be someone that I will hold dear to my heart. And so I'll just hold a moment for her. All right. Thank you so much. And so today, I will be speaking across like the broader trajectory of my work, and sharing some of its foundation, which is a piece that I actually published in this edited volume, the Black Girlhood Studies collection, edited by Dr. Aria Halliday in 2019. And so I published a chapter there called Theorizing Black Girlhood, and I was kind of thinking about this when I was in graduate school, how we think about Black girls, how we work alongside Black girls, and in ways that are truly like authentic to them and allow them to be authentic to themselves. And so while this piece was published in 2019, I want to honor that like some of my own thinking and the fields, and some newer interventions have definitely shifted, which I'm really happy to see within the field of Black girlhood studies. But I do still find this piece central and foundational to a lot of my own work, as I can try to conceptualize and make sense of Black girlhood. And so I want to be honest about where I start, how I enter in this space. And honestly, that's with my younger self. So I want to make sure I'm not blocking. So I'm going to kind of mute some of these images over here. Okay. So when, where, and how I enter, I often refer to myself present day as a Black feminist and a Black girlhood scholar. But of course, before that, I was a young Black girl myself, and I often return to this young girl in the ways that she too has had a deep impact on the person that I am today. While you see images of me happy, and oftentimes if you look in my family's old photo albums, you will see lots of photos of me smiling. I have to be honest with you that from a very young age, I struggled with being a Black girl. And so in that piece, Theorizing Black Girlhood chapter, I wrote, as I reflect on my days as a Black girl, I'm reminded of the times I looked in the mirror and never knew how to love the person I saw looking back at me. I was teased and harassed growing up because of my darker skin, my kinky hair, and have faced a great deal of anti-Blackness, sexism, classism along the way. For a long time, I hated myself because I was a Black girl, two of my identities that are most visible and always under attack. I have grown to love myself as an adult Black woman, and now as a proud Black feminist, and now I see value in who I am, as Black feminism has given me the tools to reclaim this identity. But as a researcher who does difficult work about Black girls and their struggles with their identity and the many violent attacks that they face, my inner Black girl still remains harmed and in a lot of ways unloved. And so, after each paper written, each article, each book that I read, each class session where I find myself speaking out to validate our lives, my inner Black girl resurfaces in the form of my adult tears, heartache, sadness, and Black feminism. While it has given me the tools to fall in love with my adult self, I still struggle to care for that Black girl that suffers within. And so, as a result, I advocate for this work on Black girlhoods and Black girlhood studies so that the young Black girls of today, tomorrow, and for the harmed Black girls of yesterday get to have a chance in a future that we deem to be necessary. And so I want to also speak to the work that I have done with young Black girls as well. Some of this work started, of course, in graduate school, and a lot of it was actually volunteer work. So I did some work with the Oya sisters at Hawthorne Elementary, which was in Madison, Wisconsin, where I co-created some support groups with young Black girls in fourth and fifth grade. So we would meet with them weekly, and that was really like one of the kind of starts of my work with young Black girls in space. And then eventually I co-created my own space called Black Girl Magic, in which I have experience working with young Black girls in person and virtually, which I will share with you all more as the presentation goes on. I also want to be clear what I mean by theorizing. This is a term that I generally use to think about the process of thinking about, understanding, or trying to make sense of Black girlhood, their unique positionalities, whether that be ontologically or their embodied experience. Also, the specificities and the specifics of their experiences and how they navigate the world, but also just their everyday ways of being, their knowledges and their knowledge production, their practices, and how they navigate or negotiate these very complex, complicated terrains and material realities, as well as the hostile environments and worlds that they often have to navigate. The ways that they resist, refuse, reimagine, shape, and create other worlds and ways of being too. And then when I think about who Black girls are, right, I see Black girlhood as expansive. And so while I don't attach or align Black girlhood with just one specific identity or within Western categorizations, I do want to be clear that I do see the fullness of Black girlhood, and that is across the spectrum of what we may consider different identities, whether that be queerness, whether we consider Black trans girls into this conversation, as well as transmasculine folks, non-binary youth, and those who identify as Black girl and femme themselves as well. And so, again, on my own trajectory and thinking about my path to this work, I started to engage with Black feminism pretty early in my graduate career. And it was just so helpful to understand and like develop language and a theoretical canon for how and why Black women and girls experience the world in the way that they do, the unique positioning that they are kind of forced into as it relates to like systems and structures that cause persistent marginalization, harm, and oppression for them. So I look at obviously these different structures, whether it be labor economies, whether it be schools and education, our healthcare, right, our criminal not criminal justice, but those systems of incarceration and punishment, sexual economies, etc., right? And so I really was able to use Black feminism to really get a sense of like how Black women are experiencing the world. And through this canon of Black feminism, they have been keen to provide us with language, right, to understand how stereotypes around Black femininity, and I use that term loosely, but also what Patricia Hill Collins calls these controlling images, really kind of set us up in a way. And so, obviously, looking at the mammy figure, Jezebel figure, Sapphire, and the strong Black woman, taken together, right, really make up these stereotypes that have been created about Black women that really kind of situate us as needing to be nurturing and caring for everyone despite our own pain. Promotes us as being like hyper promiscuous, hypersexual in ways that justify violence and harm against us. This very angry, right, figure who is always mad and has a problem with the world, and at the same time this strong Black woman image which was meant to empower us but at the same time is often used to dismiss us when we do need support. And so while I find utility in those tropes, right, because we can understand how Black girls maybe are seen as little, loud, angry Black women or are hypersexualized in a particular way, there are also limitations to those tropes and those stereotypes and how we can then analyze Black girls' lives through the lens of Black feminism, which really inspired the piece on theorizing Black girlhood. And so I want to touch on the reality of Black girls' experiences generally as Black girls continue to be one of the most vulnerable and targeted groups of students in today's schools and increasingly are the victims of traumatizing school violence. So during my time studying as a graduate student, actually, there were several incidents involving young Black girls and a few that I later became aware of as well. And so in 2012, police arrested 6-year-old Celicia Johnson for a temper tantrum. In 2014, the disappearance of Relisha Rudd with very little media coverage to try to find her. And unfortunately, she is still missing today. In October 2015, news media repeatedly played a video recording of a 16-year-old Black girl who was violently pulled from her desk, thrown across the floor, handcuffed by a white male school resource officer during a math class at a suburban high school. In 2017, the wrongful death of Kanika Jenkins and the dismissal and blame that she faced in public discourse as there were slow investigations to recover information about what happened to her. In February 2019, an 11-year-old Black girl was removed from her classroom, violently thrown to the ground, and punched by a white male teacher, in which during that altercation, 3 of her braids were also removed from her scalp. In 2020 of February, a 6-year-old Black girl was removed from school by police officers because she was deemed, quote, a threat to herself and others, and, quote, out of control during a temper tantrum. And so these are only a few of the several incidents involving Black girls at school for which we have reports that briefly describe the violence that they face. And so I really am curious, how can those tropes that I shared with you before be limiting in describing why it is that a young Black girl can be arrested from school because of a temper tantrum? Maybe she is seen as a very loud Black girl, but also there's something specific about Black girls' positioning as youth as they aren't granted access to childhood and also the ways that they still have this very unique experience of gender and what scholars describe as ungendering, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as this ability to consent or not, given their age factor, and that in a way that they require a level of protection and security from adults that continue to fail them. And so it's really also important as we are theorizing and thinking about Black girlhood to also understand how this history of anti-Blackness has allowed the current moments of Black girls' experiences to exist. And so the realities are that what we know to be the transatlantic slave trade, had real impacts on this disruption of gender and what we know as like these Western categorizations or these normative categories of gender and how we understand femininity in which Black girls are not granted access to, and what Hortense Spillers described as ungendering, right? In which there was no distinctions across gender to be made as it relates to Black folks who were enslaved. And then also, scholar Ibrahim describes also this disruption of age, right? So, Black children, just as much as Black women and girls, were engaged in forced labor, right? Sexual violence and harm. Black children were stripped of that category of being seen as child. And so, we have to really question then this framing of age and the ways that it disrupts our sense of time for Black youth, as well as continued forms of sexual violence, rape, and assault during slavery and Jim Crow and its immediate afterlife. The ways that Jim Crow and the segregation era forced, and a lot of Black girls actually faced lynching. And so, one of the first young children and young Black children to face murder or be lynched was Hannah Okush, who was sentenced to death in Connecticut in 1786. She was of African and Native American descent. But the perpetuation of murder and violence also ensued for young Black girls, as we are familiar with the four Black girls who died during the church bombing, as well as Ruby Bridges and many other Black girls who were planted as the face of integration. But at what cost? We often don't ask. The street harassment and mental maps that Black girls developed around the geographies that they had to also kind of create to understand what spaces were truly safe for them to navigate and negotiate, right? That would include the street. And so Dr. Lakeisha Michelle Simmons talks about the ways that Black girls had to navigate street harassment and just physical harm and violence that they also face in her book and about New Orleans during this era, segregation era in Crescent City Girls. Um, Mass incarceration and state violence continue to be another site of harm for Black women and girls, and has informed this continued educational violence that Black girls face through the school to prison pipeline or nexus, as well as the sexual abuse to prison pipeline, which I'm happy to share more about that later as well. But ultimately, right, we go from then to now here, where we have moving forward today this report from 2017, Georgetown Law and the Center of Poverty and Equality, that surveyed educators and adults about their perceptions of Black girls. And they found that during ages 5 through 14, Black girls are perceived by adults to be less innocent and more adult-like, and therefore increasingly experience unfair punishment. They also believe, and these are educators, that Black girls need less nurturing, Black girls need less protection, Black girls need to be supported less, Black girls need to be comforted less, Black girls are more independent, Black girls know more about adult topics, and Black girls know more about sex. And again, I'll reiterate that these are Black girls who are ages 5 to 14. And so, in our effort to understand, right, the positioning of Black girlhood, scholars have theorized and tried to really locate the ways that Black girls continue to face this type of harm in practice. What does that look like? So, Black girls, there is an expectation for them to conform to whiteness, but they are not considered under these categories of femininity, female, or girl. Black girls are actually rewarded in schools for disassociating with their Blackness. Black girls' authentic expressions are not allowed in school spaces as they experience isolation, physical removal via discipline, and that just includes the way that their hair grows out of their head, right? And then the consequences of educators' tendencies to associate Black girls' behavior with stereotypes of adult Black women can be far-reaching. And through this report, they found, or one of their main conclusions was that this is the way that Black girls are indeed adultified and stripped of any childhood framing or positioning to align with other scholarship that I've mentioned. And so I've also done some of this work to really try to draw on whether it be Black feminist descriptions of the ways that Black girls are facing violence, but also through the lens of Black girlhood studies. And so through a connection of these different theoretical frameworks or conceptualizations, I look at symbolic and structural violence, anti-Blackness through the lens of Afro-pessimism, as well as Black feminism and Black girlhood studies to really think through the ways that anti-Black and anti-girl terror uh, are the types of forms of violence, excuse me, that Black girls are facing. And I try to contribute to the conceptualization of what scholars like myself and Dr. Treva Lindsay call anti-Black girl violence. Ultimately, in my theoretical conception of anti-Black girl violence, essentially, this is a form of violence that denies Black girls any kind of legibility to be seen as girl, child, student, and how they are further denied access to humanity in ways that are distinct and warrant our specific analysis. So, if we understand all of these different forms of violence and the ways that Black girls are having to navigate the world in this way, how then can we possibly move from theorizing and knowing about the very tense or contentious ways that they exist in the world, and then how can we begin to theorize about Black girlhood? Excuse me. And so, throughout the trajectory of my work, I've actually offered a gentle critique, or better yet, a slight hesitation to Black feminists to not conflate their adult or womanhood experiences and analysis with the daily experiences of young Black girls in an effort to ensure that Black girlhood studies keeps Black girls' voices, descriptions, their experiences, and theoretical contributions at the center. And so scholars may suggest that Black girlhood is an identity, right? That, we can identify as Black girls, but it's also much deeper than that. So when we're thinking about and theorizing Black girlhood, scholars have also described it as a radical disposition, a framework for Black girls, femmes, and non-binary youth, and a political location unbounded by age, as well as a site of possibility. And so Dr. Amy Meredith Cox argues we should see Black girlhood as a dynamic, creative space continuously being remade in the future tense. And in that 2019 piece, I also argue that this, drawing on Cox's definition, is exactly where the work of theorizing Black girlhood has begun and should begin, whether that be in creating spaces for Black girls to define their girlhood in the present moment, but also allowing the space for these definitions to be unbounded, shifted, recreated continuously today and in the future. And so that was my 2019 conception. And I think today I would even say, like, I would also add the past lives of Black girls as part of this untimeliness of Black girlhood and how they think about their lives as they are persistently being pressed and or are running out of time, that we might be able to kind of sit with, right, a childhood that they actually aren't granted that access to. And that is to really draw on those scholars' work, especially around Black age from Ibrahim as well as Rassam Mahadio. And so there must be a reimagining of Black girlhoods that is not fixed or static, and that scholars must deal with its contention in their theorizing and practice with Black girls. And so just going back to that theorizing Black girlhood chapter, again, I wanted to just kind of bring in some other core arguments that I was making during that time, 2019. One of the biggest pieces, which I mentioned before, is that the Black feminist tropes and controlling images can be limiting for Black girlhood. And as scholars like Amy Cox argue, like the Jezebel image does not function in the same way for Black girls and teenagers as it does for Black women, that there's a dangerous agency of the Jezebel that's actually never fully available to Black girls who, because of their age, don't actually hold this status. And ultimately face a blameworthiness attributed to that image. And so Black girls can be fast or promiscuous, but their youth or minor status requires that the state be accountable to their behavior to some degree. And there's this hyper surveillance that takes place in the disciplining of their bodies and sexual expressions. I also argue for allowing the full spectrum of Black girlhood as it related to gender and sexuality, because I really called attention to, like other Black feminist scholars, the ways that Black queer and trans scholars of Black feminism's work is often folded or collapsed through like some of the canon of Black feminism. And so I didn't want us to perpetuate that through Black girlhood studies as well. And so I was hoping that we would ultimately include in our theorizing Black trans girls, gender nonconforming, gender queer, femme, identified youth, and even to draw on S.A. Smith's work, trans masculine folks. S.A. Smith writes a piece called Black Girlhood Remains, and they reflect on their Black girlhood past and refuse actually to let go of that past. And so it's really keen for us to ensure that we are including LGBTQ folks within the canon of Black girlhood studies as well too. Um, I also really push for us to allow theories of Black girlhood to continue to come from the descriptions, writings, and voices of young Black girls, and create space for this within our scholarship. And then that Black feminists should also share or reflect more on their experiences, if that is the case, on their trajectory within Black girlhood. Ultimately, if you take nothing else away from this talk, like the biggest point that I want to make is how we should see young Black girls in this work as co-theorizers, as collaborators, as interlocutors, and also as young people that deserve mundane moments of joy and respite, right? So as much as I want to include them in the work, I don't want them to have to take on a lot of this labor either. We also must also know that relationality and community is key. Not authority, right? But in the instances of care and love that we approach young Black girls. And so a lot of this has been key to this field that we now know as Black girlhood studies. I'm not sure if we can continue to call this an emerging field because it has become very expensive across and very interdisciplinary across several academic fields of study, but also within community space, which I'll talk about. But Black girlhood studies is often described in a variety of ways that really centers Black girlhood. And so Farah Jasmine Griffin in 2016 published this quote: "In this extraordinary moment in our national conversation about race, it is essential that we give voice to the Black girls who for far too long have been uniquely denied an individual identity." And scholar Ruth Nicole Brown, whose work has been foundational to Black girlhood studies, says, "As an organizing construct, Black girlhood studies makes possible the affirmation of Black girls' lives and, if necessary, their liberation." And so, also Crystal Webster uh, writes that Black girlhood studies introduces theoretically rich ways to analyze the history of childhood and youth, from discussions of their representation in the archive to assumptions about race and age. And finally, Black girlhood studies has the potential to reach the public in meaningful and accessible ways. And so I just wanted to share some texts that I found to be very, very useful in my work. Again, as the field is expanding, there are so many more texts that I'm happy to share, but I just kind of wanted to provide some seminal text here and also on this slide as well. All right, so how do we then go from the theorizing, right, from theory to what some of us may see as being practice or praxis? And so as I'm thinking about this, I really want us to consider whether it might be through our approaches to Black girl methodologies in the research, whether it is in the creation of space and mapping or marking spatiality, through the lens of Black girl cartography, to shout out Dr. Butler, and also Black girl geography, citing Lauren K. Hill, Dr. Lauren K. Hill. But the ultimate question here is how and where is it that Black girls can feel free? And have we actually figured that out yet? And so, as it relates to Black girlhood methodologies and the research, these are just a few of the methods that I've engaged in, but honestly, truly have also had to push back on some of the traditional ones. I lean into a lot of scholars' work, especially Savannah Changer, who's also done work within the fields of education and Black studies, and anthropology, to push on ethnography as a methodology. But how do we keep Black girls at the center, right? If you're familiar with ethnography, a lot of it is like field work and, observing folks. Maybe you do some interviewing and all of that. But one thing that feels uncomfortable about ethnography is the level of surveillance and just observing folks. Yes, there is participant ethnography, but still you are entering someone else's space and place and like taking, in a lot of ways. And so, excuse me, Savannah Changer really kind of pushed me to really see how we allow Black girls to determine how they will participate beyond what we have on the IRB and beyond what we say, right, will happen within our study. It's about really allowing them to be collaborators and co-theorizers in the work where they determine how, well, they say what can and cannot go, right? This work does not become more important than them and their lives. And how they fare in the write ups as well as the analysis process is also very key. For me, I worked with young middle school Black girls, and so they weren't reading like 30-page chapters that I have written, but I'll show you in just a moment how I use their language and also my own theoretical canon to bring those worlds together. Things like member checking also happen in ways that are very like unique as well in terms of like being in dialogue with them, being in conversation about the work, and also, looking across different forms of data. I will say, in narrative inquiry, a lot of that looks like oral history interviews with adult Black women, talking about their memories, but also interviewing with young Black girls. Black girl autoethnography has been useful for the ways that I actually turn inward and acknowledge my own Black girlhood. Sister circles are very similar to what we may conceptualize as focus groups, but they have been useful in my work and research as well. And more recently, have been diving into Black girl autopoetics and digital Black girlhood studies by Dr. Ashley Green Wade. And so she's really pushing us to consider what it looks like to ethically engage Black girls in digital research, and in ways that is also protective of them because we know how harmful the digital space can also be. And so I'm going to kind of shift and move us forward to talk about spaces and spatiality, something that has also been very key to Black girlhood studies, really understanding whether it be mapping or unmapping and co-creating the spaces that Black girls can feel safe to just be and imagine what freedom and liberation might look like or feel like for them. And so I would be remiss to talk about this without also honoring the legacy of Black educational space, survival programs, and the legacy of Black education. And so the first note is obviously that Black educators and organizers have always created alternative and community-based educational space, as well as community schools to intervene for Black youth, given right the harm and violence that they continue to face in our traditional school spaces. A lot of this was not just about education, but also health and wellness, survival, safety, and navigating the experiences of being a Black youth in America. So some of those examples are like the SNCC Freedom Schools, the Black Panther Party community schools. Um, they really utilized a lot of political education to resist as well as disrupt some of the things that were happening in the school space. And also, there is a key role that Black women and Black women organizers play in constructing these spaces and crafting them for and alongside youth. And today, right, this legacy continues as Black women or Black girls are also creating what we know to be Black girl spaces, but it's also informed by this Black educational knowledge tradition and Black feminist organizing practices through the creation of Black fugitive educational spaces, which is coined by Dr. Kiana Ross, and Black girl spaces, which I'll actually talk about more now. So, what are Black girl spaces? Basically, how do we move into what we describe? Black girl spaces are sites that Black girls imagine and co-create to support their physical, mental, and emotional well-being that allow them to just be, right? However, there is a paradox within these spaces that we know to be Black girl spaces. And scholars remind us that all Black girl spaces do not set out to do what they are intended to do. So Nia Chai and Ohito argue that even programs ran and operated by Black women incorporate curriculums that perpetuate messages about Black girlhood, that promote respectability politics and suggestions about good and bad behaviors as well as bodies, etc. And the limits and I'm sorry, and it limits their multiplicity of Black girlhoods. And so, in a lot of ways, these spaces can reinforce the very anti Black violence or anti Black girl violence as they problematize Black girls, their ways of being, and their existence, as opposed to just letting them be and experience the full spectrum of what we or they would conceptualize to be as childhood. And so, I've tried to push and make a distinction here into what I've been calling fugitive Black girl spaces, but really leaning into again some of that deep history around Black girls and Black girlhoods. So Nazira Wright says that the attics and the garrets in which enslaved Black girls lived are cramped, isolated, and at times oppressive spaces. Yet Black girls use them as sources of mental freedom and places where they imagine and plan for a specific future, right? So here she's referring to folks like Harriet Jacobs, who had to create their own sites of escape. And even though they weren't comfortable or entirely livable spaces, right? They were a mode of escape in which they were able to seek a bit of refuge. Also, scholar Ruth Nicole Brown also argues that Black girls need power and not programs. And so, drawing on these two like conceptualizations in my mind, I see fugitive Black girl spaces as those that seek to shift power to Black girls, both the power to experience and define their life, their love, community, and what that their existences look like to just be on their own terms and alongside other Black girls as well. And so I'll talk now about my experience developing a Black girl space as a site of refuge for young Black girls. And really, my vision for this work was to provide young Black girls with a space to center their identity and build community. We were placed within two predominantly white middle schools, and so they felt very isolated in their school building. And so a lot of the ways that I was kind of introduced to this space was to like come in and like help them. They won't stop fighting, right? It was really to essentially fix the girls and make them conform to a school space. But my goal was just to create a space where they could just exist as who they wanted to be. And so young people got what they needed. And they weren't get what they weren't getting from the school building. And we began by first asking them what they wanted to address. We created activities and dialogue based on the things that they decided were most important. And so I often describe this as a sacred pedagogical space rooted in their lives, experiences, and grounded in love and care. And so some of the activities, like the one that you see on this image, in this image on the left, look like some circle conversations or dialogue, socio-political dialogue and education, identity-based projects, arts and crafts, play, double dutch dancing, yoga, field trips, video, film screenings. But we also had some really difficult and important conversations around like stereotypes, colorism, and redefining Black girlhood. I conducted that work from 2017 to 2019, so that was like towards the end of my graduate school trajectory, and then I did have to move and take my first tenure track job, but I continued the work of Black Girl Magic there, and I kind of expanded how I saw this work and the possibility. And so I worked directly then with my undergrads to maintain the space. And so there were three co-created spaces, I would say. One was the classroom. And so some of my students, they were taking my classes. I was teaching Black feminisms, Black girlhood studies courses, as well as Black studies, intro to Black studies courses. This like inadvertently kind of like led to a recruitment strategy in which some of the Black women that were taking my courses wanted to do this work with me in Black Girl Magic. And so we created again a space within a school, but for the first year it had to be virtual due to the pandemic. And then the second year we were able to return in person. But I would say the undergrads served as mentors to these middle school students. And through there, we also created an informal research collective where myself and the undergrad student facilitators would actually reflect on and talk about our own Black girlhood experiences. So, in practice, this was the way that I tried to, or I should say, we tried to have a space where we could reflect about our Black girlhoods, but not in a way that would overshadow the work that needed to be done in the Black Girl Magic space for young Black girls themselves, right? So we really wanted to keep that space for them. And ultimately, it ended up becoming an intergenerational space because there were high school students that later kind of I got recruited, and they actually served as mentors to the middle school students, and the undergrads were still present, serving as, mentors, facilitators in the space, and then myself. And so it was just a really amazing collective that we created. And I actually published a piece with my students about this experience. This piece talks a lot about how we navigated and negotiated this process of remembering and recovering our experiences as young Black girls, and how that led us into this work to create and co-create space with Black girls of the present moment that we were working with in Black Girl Magic. So I'll let this sit on the screen for a moment. If you're interested, we published this in Girlhood Studies in 2022. Um, and so just going back to the Black Girl Magic space, as it became a virtual space, and then back in person again, we really still just tried to keep it true to what Black girls wanted. Although it was difficult times during the pandemic, we had to make sure to shift into something that they could be proud of. And so some of that looked like hosting a virtual roller skating session, which you see on the top right image, as well as paint and artwork sessions, as well as games. So we would find these games that they would find where we all could log in and like play the game together, which was actually really cool. And then sometimes that would be like us being on TikTok or whatever, but really they kind of like led how we engaged with each other. And then in person, we just continued our same like in-person work and dialogue. During the pandemic, I will also say that I drew from community organizers and their mutual aid efforts. And so I would bring all the items that the youth needed for the virtual sessions, and I would deliver it to their houses every week as well. So in a lot of ways, Black Girl Magic became this site of refuge, housed both within the school, but also within our home spaces and the places that we joined virtually. We understood and understand Black girl spaces as unbounded to physical location, and view these spatialities as physical, conceptual, or theoretical, metaphorical, and even digital spaces, again, to cite Ashley Green Wade's work. So their practices ultimately also become a Black girl space, right? So now I'm kind of moving us from, the theory, the research method, to the community engaged space of a Black girl space. And now just the daily practices and the ways that we exist as Black girls is also, right, another way to theorize and think through and make sense of and build meaning around Black girlhood. And so some scholars define the ways that Black girls read, write, speak, move, and create as what they call Black girl literacy. Play is also seen as a Black girl literacy, but also a Black girl space. And so scholar Kira Gaunt writes about this a lot, and thinking about like double dutch, for example. She says double dutch regulates relationships rather than rules. The girls negotiate an invisible syllabus of working together, whether that be in the ropes or eventually out. The constantly shifting situations, the different jumpers and turners involved, the different rhythms and snippets of rhythms, turns play into a process. It is a process of negotiating musical tastes, making and building an imagined community of sisterhood. Also, again, to highlight Wade's work as well as Autumn Griffin's work, that Black girls engage with digital and social media tools in ways that are really important for us to understand, as well as the storying and storytelling, playwriting. There have been art spaces, spaces that engage Black girls in reading through YA novels like the Bree Love Readers, poetry, dance, roller skating, digital media content creation, as well as organizing and activism. I want to shout out Freedom Inc. and Black Girls Matter through Bianca Gomez, who actually created a space for Black girls to fight against, right, some of the harmful school policies that were happening, and they actually had a victory, right? So creating these spaces look very different, and they can be shaped in many different ways. And so now I will transition to talking about the research and the co-theorizing. So going from my study to like co-theorizing alongside Black girls and trying to make sense of what it is that they were telling me about their experience. And so I will say, just again, the study was based in two predominantly white middle schools, and we created the Black Girl Magic space there within the school. A lot of my work looked at, I actually conducted interviews with the youth as well as observations, participant observations of their day-to-day schooling as well as within the Black Girl Magic space. All right. So I want to start with Layla. And Layla is a seventh grade, 12-year-old Black girl, and she attends the school that I describe as Ward Middle School. And so Layla here writes on her poster, as you can see on the top of her poster board, this school is a hellhole. And so this was actually during the activity in Black Girl Magic when we had the girls write about who they are, how they want to see themselves. We were entering a new year, so this was early January. The new year just passed, and we're like, hey, let's just kind of reset, come back to ourselves. How are we feeling about ourselves? And so while this poster board was supposed to be all about her, she still found space on this paper to write that this school is a hellhole. This was not really surprising to us because we often heard her describing the school in this way. But what I will say came alive was the ways that she described the school as a hellhole and the language that the girls use in their constant conversations with me that really confirmed this statement, and what she meant about them having to exist in this very unlivable place. And so some of the interviews really highlighted the complexity of the girls' schooling experience. And I only have like a few examples, but happy to share more in the Q&A. But Tahiri was an eighth grade student, and she says the teachers, say slick racist stuff and they try to downgrade Black students. I've experienced that myself with a teacher. She literally told me that you probably shouldn't do that because you're Black. And I was like, seriously, you're really going to tell me not to do my dream job because I'm Black? But everyone else in the class was sharing what they wanted to do, and that wasn't told to them. I wanted to be a surgeon. And then there was another example that she shared with me of an experience that she had with her gym teacher. And she says, my teacher is racist. She tried to say me and my friend was trying to steal out of the locker room. We came to the dean of students and assistant principal, and they watched the camera, and okay, we didn't steal anything. But now she still tells me and my friend that we can't go through the locker room, right? So existing within a school space that is a hellhole looks like being blamed for stealing something. In this case, Tahiri shared that it was pencils. Accused of stealing pencils out of a locker room, being proven that you did not steal those pencils, and still not being granted access to the locker room space. That also looks like a teacher literally shutting down your dreams, where Tahiri is like, I want to be a surgeon. Everyone else gets to dream and imagine who they want to be. And she is told she cannot do that. I was also deeply interested in comparing the girls' experiences across the school building as well as the Black Girl Magic space, especially because we were in the same physical location, right? Like the sessions at this point in the study took place in person in the school building. And so I bring in Savannah's words here in which she describes Black Girl Magic. She says, when I first come to school, I just cannot wait until lunch on Wednesdays because it's like, oh my God, we got Black Girl Magic today. Yes. And then I'd be a little mad in the morning time because I wish Black Girl Magic was going to start right when you get to school. But then, like, my environment and all my skin gets brighter when we come to Black Girl Magic. And so we just continue talking about the space, like what she enjoys. And as she's wrapping up, she says, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done for us. You made me come out of my shell and just breathe and not be scared or shy to speak what I have to say. So, yeah, thank you. And I continue to really be overwhelmed by Savannah's gratitude for Black Girl Magic. Although I was happy that she was enjoying the space, I also realized the depths of the impact and the necessity of the space for her to survive through the most taken for granted action of breathing. As an 11-year-old Black girl was expressing her gratefulness to have breath and to just breathe in an environment, the school building, in which, quote, the push is always towards Black death, essentially. What does it mean that Black Girl Magic is the space that consistently gives this young girl breath while existing within a school that persists in suffocating her and choking the life out of her? Black Girl Magic in this moment became the work of keeping breath in the Black girl body and the space that helps Black girls to survive. Savannah situates breathing as a space and location mapped as a site of Black girl fugitivity. Therefore, we must continue to locate the spaces that allow Black girls to breathe and wrestle with the realities that finding spaces to breathe for Black girls is also another act of refusal that they must negotiate in schools daily. In my conversations with other Black girls like Savannah, I always asked them what they would change about our Black Girl Magic group space, and I was most often met with the response more time or more days. And perhaps they were just really speaking to the need to find more spaces where they could just breathe. And so, as we think about these greater impacts on Black girls and their mental health, I really want to highlight this assessment that took place at the schools and what happens when we dismiss and ignore what Black girls are ultimately trying to tell us. And so, while I know assessments are rooted in their own anti-Black culturally insensitive framings, I want to be careful not to frame Black girls as being at risk of something. But this assessment essentially asked the students broader questions around how the students thought they were seen by their peers, their teachers, their families, and outside, influences. And so a lot of the results of this assessment really aligns with the scholarship that suggests that Black women and girls suffers from higher levels of stress than their same and or differing gender, race counterparts and peers. So this was a social and emotional screener that they gave to the middle school students. And so if you could see in this box in which they are separated by gender and race, and for Black girls, they were experiencing an elevated risk and extremely elevated risk of these behaviors that I'll share in just a moment, and the highest across all their peers, especially within their same gender category as well as their peers across other genders. And this is for seventh grade students at the school. And so the concerns or the risks in this assessment were focused on stress, depression, and anxiety. And so, in seventh grade, Black girls in the district already represented the highest elevated risk and extremely elevated risk for externalizing or internalizing systems related to mental health concerns. So, externalizing shows like aggression or antisocial behavior, or negative behaviors directed towards an external environment, while internalizing really highlights stress, depression, and anxiety, which are negative behaviors that are focused more inward. And so the school psychologist actually reached out to me after seeing this assessment and was alarmed, and her reaction was to enter into the Black Girl Magic space to teach the girls resiliency and coping strategies, right? So she wanted to do this as an intervention as opposed to just talking with the girls first to understand what was causing some of these feelings and these emotions. She really downplayed the role that we were playing in like shaping a space with the girls as adults, right? And completely dismissed the work that we were doing. And really thought that all she had to do was teach them how to be resilient and to cope, which is deeply problematic because in my conversations with the girls and in our space, so much of what they were dealing with and a lot of the stress that they were facing actually was rooted in their daily experience in the school building. And so I want to come back to Layla's words because as you can see on this poster where she's supposed to be defining and identifying herself, she's writing quotes like when they go high, when they go low, you go high. Um, and she was talking about how this was a quote that her counselor will oftentimes share with her to help her cope. And if you see on the bottom of that, she writes, I'm not kind, as she's describing herself. And so, in so many ways, she's internalizing like these negative perceptions of who she is. And during our interview, you'll see this quote on the left where she says, I'm getting better at my anger problem. Every time we Black students get into a situation, the school counselor will read these quotes to us, like the one, when they go low, you go high. And those help a lot, right? The reality is that Layla had justified anger for the ways that she and other black girls were being treated in the school building and problematized, but instead she was kind of internalizing in a sense that she needed anger management as opposed to addressing the suffering that was taking place in the ways that the school was actually perpetuating that suffering against her. And so girls, black girls in particular, are not afforded, right, even the legibility from folks that should be helping them, school psychologists, as they oftentimes fail them when trying to just fix them or correct them through resilience strategies rather than address the pain that they are facing. And why does this ultimately matter? As it relates to Black girls' health and well-being, there is an increase that we are seeing as it relates to Black girls' experiences with unaliving and suicide rates. This was published recently, I believe it was in Washington Post. And I really want us to really take into consideration how the school actually plays a role in these increasing rates of suicide alongside across Black girls' experiences as ages 15 to 24, their rates of suicide have increased by 59%. Also, these attempts among Black children and teens are increasing at alarming rates. And while overall through teens we've seen a decrease, that is not true for Black youth. Black youth as young as 5 through 11 have attempted and died due to suicide. And a recent study also found that Black girls aged 13 to 19 suicide rates nearly doubled between 2001 and 2017. And so a lot of the research says that the reason for these suicide attempts across Black youth is greater internalization of racial and structural issues and psychiatric issues or lack of access, but also how much of this is deeply rooted into the school space as well. As we think about like even our most talented or how we kind of label Black girls as gifted, as being the ones that we honor and celebrate, it's also true that they report greater psychological and social emotional costs than their counterparts, and they are less likely to receive mental health treatment, as well as a lack of adequate support for emotional disabilities. I think ultimately what I've learned through this work is that we have to be really, really honest about Black girls and their narratives. And so also the things that they are wrestling with. And so just as much as I would ask them to be vulnerable in our space, I also had to share that level of vulnerability with them, even if that meant that I would also be potentially triggered by some of the things that we would share. And so in the activity that I'll share here, this was a redefining Black girlhood activity where we had the girls write like things that they just have heard about Black girls or heard things said about Black girls. And so on post-it notes they wrote like, I heard Black girls are ugly, mean, they have too many kids, they're smart, they're bossy, they're strong, they're ratchet, broke, their hair is nappy, all they do is fight, they're ghetto, they talk loud, they used to be slaves, it means to be mistreated, to be a bitch. We weren't meant to be on this earth. We were baked too hard or beautiful and other good things, right? So these are just some of the things that they wrote on those post-it notes. And in response, we really tried to get them over several weeks, right, to redefine what Black girlhood was on their terms. And so sometimes that look like these artworks and like curating these like collages, or even on the post-it note, as you can see, we had them write how they want to be seen as Black girls. And in the language up in the right hand corner, some of them wrote like, to be a Black girl is amazing because of my culture, being proud of you, loving your own skin, etc., etc. We also tried to do some of this deep theorizing in the artwork that we created. So, of course, more collages because we love that, and creating posters. But I will say this image on the far right was actually something that they chose to put up in their school in the cafeteria, right? And as I mentioned, in the beginning, they weren't really excited about joining a group called Black Girl Magic, right? Because it would further isolate them. They would hate to hear it called on the loudspeaker because everybody just looks at them. But eventually they gained a sense of pride. And so we created this image where they wrote what Black Girl Magic meant to them, surrounding the image of Black girls and Black women. And they put it up in the school lunchroom, right? And so it wasn't about representation for them. It was about actually just being proud of who they were. But the reality is that we had to still navigate the pervasiveness of anti-blackness. And so just as much as we might have affirming conversations within our group space, there were also moments where it felt like we were reverting in a lot of ways because they would come back and say something else that maybe was harmful as it relates to being a black child, or something that they had heard someone else share as well. And so that was probably the most challenging part of this work. And I shared these images. These are some self-portraits that we did. Mine is on the bottom. A student named Raina's is on the top. And Raina and I were like the same complexion, basically. But Raina's painting was a lot lighter than mine. And so I just wanted to sit next to her and like gently encourage her. I was like, maybe it's a issue with the mixing of the paint or whatever. So I was just showing her how to, get a little bit darker skin tone with the paint, and she started to paint. And I noticed as she was painting, she was actually crying. And so Raina did share with me a lot of issues that she had around her skin color, around colorism, being bullied at school, and being made fun of for being a darker skinned black girl. And so that was a moment where I had to learn to like sit next to her and provide some kind of sense of support, but then also know when to take a step back and not kind of put so much of my own what I want to be on her picture, right? She has to go through her own journey. And so that's the difficult part of this work because I also felt triggered as somebody who has navigated, right, colorism as well as a young black girl. But I will say in the next week, because of this experience, we watched a video about colorism in the space. And then Raina, like, surprisingly came and just stood next to me. She didn't say anything. We didn't talk about colorism. We watched the video. She was standing next to me. And then I was that. So I felt like, in a lot of ways, as I was sitting next to her during this activity, she came and stood next to me the very next week, which I think speaks to how we are just affording Black girls grace in this work, too. Um, and then I know I'm getting close to my time. I just got like a few more slides, but I have to share this example because as I'm talking about like this regressing, even when we would build community, like a big fight happened amongst a few girls in the group, and it was just like, okay, what do we do? Like, it doesn't seem like their conflicts are ending. And so really, we kind of put it on them. Some of the girls were facing possible suspension, so we had to fight on the back end of that. But also, we came together in a restorative session and was just like, what do y'all want? Do you want to end the group? We don't have to do this. Like, what is it? How do we want to move forward? And so Keisha says, I feel like if we end the group, none of us are going to talk to each other because I didn't talk to you, I didn't talk to you, I didn't talk to you. And she's pointing to the girls around the room. And she's like, we're just going to keep acting like we don't know each other. And then Allie agrees with her and she's like, I feel like we represent unity and like we should just really try to represent each other better together. And so this was like ultimately a moment where they could have said, you know what, yeah, let's just choose the pathway and just decide to not stick together. But in a lot of ways, they engaged in their own forms of survival and refusal when they chose one another. And we agreed that that didn't mean they had to be best friends, but it did mean that that they agreed that they were going to look out for each other. And the collective that they created in Black Girl Magic made reconciliation and survival possible. And ultimately, they remapped what community looked like as a site of respite. So Black Girl Magic and spaces like it are these kind of intentional fugitive educational spaces where Black girls can escape and mute the violence that happens at school in an attempt to heal the pain and suffering that they experience in the classroom or in the school building daily. And so while some programs may actually demonize their conflicts and reinforce like respectable behaviors, we instead gave them space to validate their feelings, to hear each other out, and to determine if they would return in or show up for each other, which they did and they continued to do. And so just centering some of their moments of joy here as a lot of the times, honestly, the activities that we did with them were prompted. It was like giving them a prompt or like kind of prompting them to think positively about Black girlhood, but this was one of our last sessions together, and we were just outside the school building jumping double dutch, and we had some chalk that they could draw. And this was actually what they chose to draw. Like, we didn't give them any prompts or tell them to do anything, but they wrote things in front of the school building like "I'm Black and I'm proud," Black girls for life, and they drew images of Black girls. And I just found that to be very powerful that they were able to reassert what mattered to them right in front of the school building, right? A place that caused them so much harm. And so I really want us to think about the possibility within Black girl spaces, and how do we ensure that we make space for Black girls to create and determine how these spaces operate. And that also, I keep using this language of like fugitivity and escape, right? But it's something that's also not celebratory, right? Like, Black girls shouldn't have to escape or go off into a separate room, right, in order to just live and be, right? And so we can't really like write this up as the solution, but we can use these spaces to kind of guide us in our other world making practices, and hopefully that will guide us toward liberation. And so I'll just leave you all with some questions, and then I'll just show you really quickly a snapshot of my current work, and then we'll wrap. But the first question is, how will we begin to archive and document Black girlhood in ways that preserve our stories, histories, present, and futures in ethical ways? What about Black girlhood memories and the remembrance practices that we engage in? How can we continue to theorize Black girlhood alongside Black girls and youth in practice? And then what does it mean to theorize Black girlhood, not only in our work, so in our careers, in our research, in our classrooms, in our community spaces, but also just in our day-to-day interactions with Black girls, that allow us to engage pedagogies of care, love, community, and that keeps them and their well-being and authentic ways of being and knowing at the center. And so my current work is really looking at memory as a fugitive site of spatial knowledge. And so really kind of adding to this lane of Black girlhood studies, like many other scholars, seeing it as a site for collective rememory and recovery. And I was surprised to see in my 2019 piece that I had actually found this quote. Sometimes you just don't realize like you've been thinking about this stuff for so long, but I wrote, perhaps Black girlhood becomes a space of healing, a space of fugitivity, or a space of present, or a space of deep reflection in an effort to interlock, reattach, mold together their past, present, and future lives. And so I really drew on also Alexis Pauline Gumbs to think about how Black girlhood memories can be these spatial knowledges of community, as well as Black women's past memories, or just the memories of Black girlhood generally. And so, what does it mean to escape in a context that's the same? Or what does it mean to make it look like we are in the same moment, but really you are just traveling forth, back and forth through time? And so, in a lot of ways, these sites of Black girls that Black girls curate and create mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically have something to teach us all about memory, safety, and radical love, as well as fugitivity and freedom, right? And so I'm thinking about this loop of our archival trajectories that really kind of marry the past, present, and future without any broader distinctions between them. And so my current work is a digital humanities project that is the rolling archives of Black girlhood that I am calling a living archive and a digital scrapbook. I engage a lot of digital ethnography, digital storytelling, and community archiving practices in this work, focusing on myself as well as other Black women and trying to hold on to some of those Black girlhood memories, as well as some of the archiving of the work that I did alongside Black girls. And I am over my time, but I just want to say thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions, but also stay connected. So I have put my contact information here and places that you can find me as well. But I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm just allowing people to kind of react in the chat because your presentation was so amazing. As someone, again, who loves Black girlhood studies, I just felt heard, I felt seen. There were some things that you definitely shared that was also a trigger. for me, but that's a part of work, right? Um, and so now, I want you to look at the chat and take in all the phrases because you definitely deserve it. Not easy, but needed. So thank you. Now it's to post them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and then we can take questions that way.
I don't know if y'all heard Dav, but if you have any questions, you can pop those in the chat or feel free to unmute, raise your hand, and speak directly to Dr. Ashley.
Dr. Ashley, I was wondering if you could put your contact information back up.
Mhm. Yes, I will
I'm,
drop it in the chat actually.
okay. I'm currently working on a master's thesis on disciplinary referrals for Black girls. And
Mm.
I think that if there's a possible way that I could get some of your research, it'll be great to be able to cite you in what I'm working on.
Of course, definitely. Yeah, I've done some of that work as well too, so always happy to connect and talk about that too. But wishing you all the best with this work. But yes, I'm putting all my contact in the chat right now too for everyone.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing a lot of the stories that are really connecting to like your own experience with girls, but then also some stories that like we know that have occurred nationwide as well.
Definitely. Of course. Thank you so much for being here.
Ashley, I have a question, and sorry I'm not on camera. I am fully sitting here in a bonnet. But the work that you do in your chapter, I'm a fourth year doctoral student studying sexuality in Black girlhood, and I really found your chapter powerful in 2019 about kind of the need to kind of, talk about sexuality. Do you find that showing up, or how do you find sexuality in any way? Now, this is not a leading question. How do you find it showing up in your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm actually needing to do more of that, but I will say that for me, it's been a very fine line between like understanding Black girlhood and sexuality and also being careful around what is shared. So just like full transparency, like I'm writing a book about this right now, and so one of the reviewers actually did push me and just say like have you thought about like some of the other ways that Black girls are experiencing this hypersexualization or sexuality, and there was a few actual examples that I'm not comfortable sharing in the work that really kind of speaks to a lot of the ways that Black girls face harm as it relates to sexuality. And so that's something that I've really also want to be like super transparent about, that in doing this work, like you have to make the determinations around what is shared and what is like, honoring the girls and their wishes. But I will say too, I have tried to also think about sexuality as it relates to Black girlhood, because they're the young Black girls, like they are all weren't just like cis heterosexual Black girls. Some of them were actually even thinking through their own identities around sexuality and what that meant for them. They had questions. And so I know I had a recent talk with a few sister scholars, and we were talking about how like try not to hypersexualize girls, but also give them like real information about what it looks like to be curious about conversations around sex, but also inclusive sex, beyond just like the cishet sex information that they maybe get in schools. And so some of that looked like journaling. Some of the girls would like journal some of their questions, and then the facilitators would like write back to them. I had girls that would like come up to me privately and just try to talk about like their interest in like dating other girls. Some girls were dating each other in the space. And so really just try to honor like their curiosities, but also just like their genuine, like authentic ways of not engaging, but also just like being within their sexual identities. And then the last thing I would say that I actually write about in the book is how they like I'm trying to think of the language that I use, but they really like disrupt a lot of the like cis heteronormativity because I remember being a young black girl and it was like when we would play house, right? Like you got to have a mom and a dad and all of this, and I just love that in their play they were like, no, I'm a mom and this is a mom and this is our children, you know. And so I just feel like there were a lot more even like aware when it comes to sexuality even in play, and so I talk about that a little bit too, but I did want to highlight a piece that actually just came out by Mara D. Johnson and Monet Cooper. It is Black Queer Girls Letter Writing, Placemaking for Possibility and Intimacy and Freedom Dreaming in School. That was just published in Urban Education in 2025. So I do see the field of Black girlhood studies taking into account sexuality and even in the ways that we define girlhood beyond, you know, like these very binary ways of understanding sex and sexuality. And then some of Savannah Change's work also has been like useful for myself, but I do still believe that that is an area where we need to further develop and grow in the field too. So sorry that was like a super long answer, but just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of everything.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And Miss Hubbard, if you're ready to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. You're giving me a lot to think about. So I completed my second doctorate in May, and my work focused on looking at how young Black women are prepared to transition into adulthood from foster care. So looking really closely at that preparation process through the eyes of Black female social workers who work with them in a child welfare context. And um, listening to what you did in the middle schools, right? Because that's missing, right? That tailored space just for Black girls, right, is what's missing to really be able to focus in and to help support them. And I got that in my interviews with the Black female social workers working with them, that they are not um they get these basic services. They don't get a lot of services, right? And so but not tailored to focus on their specific needs. And when you
Mhm.
have young ladies who are aging out, um you know, they need to know how to navigate these spaces. They need to know how to deal with colorism, like you're talking about, right? And so I'm looking forward to diving more into your work, and because I would definitely like to bring some of what you're doing into the space, because these are ideas of how do you create these spaces safely for young Black women who are transitioning, right? And preparing to go out there. They need these spaces just for them, dedicated for them to be able to think through, what does it mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to be a Black girl? How has my Black childhood been erased in this system? And so I just wanted to say thank you. And if there's any more good ideas, I'm going to definitely reach out, because I do want to build up some good activities and strategies the way you're presenting to bring it into the child welfare context, right? I think it's really important in that space too. Hmm.
100%. Yes, I would be happy to connect. I think too, it wasn't within child welfare, but Amy Cox's work was within like what they refer to as a homeless shelter at the time. But yeah, so even similar like similar-ish narratives, but that stripping away of like childhood and like having to I don't even know if it's like really even super growing up super fast because you just also navigate like the world in a very particular way due to this social service system that isn't fully like supportive and addressing. So yeah, I'd be happy to connect offline for sure. Yeah,
That
thank
would
you.
be beautiful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I know we are running up against time, so I'll try to make mine cute and sweet. I think your work is fantastic. I appreciate that you're doing it, but I also feel like it's so heavy, right? You mentioned how it's triggering, and I mean, low key, it's work we wish we didn't have to do, right? Like in talking about the harms that Black girls experience. So I guess I'm curious because of the weight of this work, like even though it is rewarding, you do experience a lot as you do it. So how do you care for yourself in this process? Like, how do you preserve, some of your like sanity while doing this work that is very that it takes a lot of you and it's very personal, right?
Mm.
You mentioned the interaction that you had with the one student. So like, how do you take care of yourself during this time? Because I think that we have to do that in order to keep doing the work.
Hmm. Think just a deep exhale because that's very real and I don't know that I've figured that out honestly. But I've just continued to be honest. So I do have a therapist. I do continue to be honest about like how I feel. I think even I just had a talk the other day and I was just like, I don't think I've ever taught a class that has not seen my tears, you know? So I'm deeply also just trying to heal still from like my younger experiences into like things that I'm constantly seeing today, even right now, right? Like so much of the harm and violence that continues to happen to us. And so, yeah, I'm just deeply passionate about this though. I do feel like this is like life work in a lot of ways. And more than anything, I just want to develop or make sure that the work is something that Black girls, all of us, right, can be proud of. So I don't know that I figured out because some days are very heavy, like some days are very hard. I will say I have a 16-month-old. So she's bringing me a lot of joy right now. This new project, the Rolling Archives that I shared, actually has been bringing a lot of joy because I've been returning to my childhood home a bit and also just a practice that brought me a lot of like respite, which is roller skating. And so I've been able to like engage in some of that work. And yeah, but honestly, truly, like being honest, because for so long as a young Black girl, I shielded honesty. Like I just tried to be good. I tried to be perfect. I tried to be, stay out of trouble, do all these things. And I think that harms me because I silenced myself in a lot of ways. So I think I do also, even though it's very heavy and difficult, I do find some healing in writing about the difficulties of our experiences because I want a better world and I don't know how else to do that sometimes but to just be real and to put it out there and just hope that our dreams of what we want to achieve in the future do at some point come true because Black girls, Black youth, all of us, right? Like we deserve that. And so I really appreciate this question. It's something I want to be real that I haven't fully figured out, especially because the academy demands so much of us as well. And so I am exhausted a lot. Like I'm very tired. I'm very overwhelmed by the world, overstimulated. I am very hurt by a lot of things, but I think being in community and in spaces like this is so important as well too. And just learning how to try to disconnect if even possible. But I really appreciate this question.
And then there's a question in the chat. They asked, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Do you see a role for district or state policy to create dedicated spaces for Black girls?
I would hope so. I think I mean, I truly want to say that I hope so. And at the same time, in working, in these various realms, but also it just takes so much of the educating and then also so much of the being dismissed reality factor, right? Like even in the districts, when I would talk to district leaders, for example, they would be like, well, or, they always had an excuse or like, did you consider that, there's always a bit of pushback that I've experienced. So I am a little bit pessimistic if I can be honest, but also want to push us to consider like what else is possible, right? Like how can we take these Black girl spaces and reimagine and take us beyond, right, the current system and structure and makeup of our educational space. And that feels difficult right now because they're literally stripping away the little things that we were able to even do. But there is still possibility. I'm holding on to that. We can still reimagine and recreate something else. We just really got to stick together in this. And so, yeah, probably not the best or easiest answer, but yeah, I'm happy to stay in community and keep thinking about this together because it's yeah, we got to figure something out. Thank you.
All right. I think our host is a bit frozen, but thank y'all so much for being here with us again tonight and hearing from Dr. Ashley. And we, oh, there you are, Daph, my bad. Go ahead.
Am I delayed? I'm so sorry. But thank you all so much for coming. Ashley, thank you for everything. We will be in contact. I have learned so much. So thank you for this work and thank you for the encouragement as well. You all have a phenomenal night. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Of course. Have a good night.
You too.